Today on Trucks, the Trailboss gets an axle upgrade as well as brand new disc brakes in the rear before the guys go under the hood of their CJ7 to install the ultimate off-road tool. Then it's another creation from Performance West. It looks like a PT Cruiser, but it's really a bruiser. After all that, they'll upgrade the fuel delivery system on the Wicked Willys. That's all today on Trucks.
Welcome to this week's show, everybody. If you've been hanging around the truck shop the past few weeks, then you've seen us transform this 82 CJ7 from a pretty rough stalker to something that not only looks, but will also be a whole lot more capable off-road.
Now, since we've already put a much larger wheel and tire combination on Project Trailboss, that's going to accentuate a problem that these old CJs have, and that's the two-piece axles and these AMC-20 rear ends. Matter of fact, if you've got an old Jeep and you do any kind of trail riding at all, upgrading to the stronger one-piece axles is almost mandatory.
Now, since we plan on spending a ton of time off-road with the Trailboss, went to Randy's Ring and Pinion and picked up this one-piece axle kit for a CJ7. As you can see, you have two one-piece all-steel axles that are considerably stronger than the stalkers. And that's not all you get with this kit. You also have brand new bearings as well as seals and all the hardware you're going to need to slide them in.
Of course, the stock rear brakes on the old Jeeps aren't exactly the best, especially if you're trying to stop big old tires. So we went to stainless steel brakes and got one of their rear disc brake conversion kits to take care of that problem. Now it comes with the rotors, calipers, and everything you'll need to put it all together right down to new brake lines.
With our Jeep up in the air, we can get started on disassembly. First up, we need to lose these old drums. Now keep in mind, if you're having trouble getting the drums off, you may have to come back here and adjust the shoes to free them up.
Now the mill has the drums out of the way, we'll pull off this castle nut and washer on the end of the axle, and then finally the hub. Now, you will have to go down and rent this special tool to pull this hub off of there. Now I know what you're thinking, heck, I'll just hit it with a hammer or two, come in here with a couple screwdrivers and pry it off. Well, forget it. You'll never get it off that way. Now you can see the weak spot of these axles. Right in here at this spline and this taper is where these things are going to break when the going gets tough, especially if you have bigger tires or a lot of horsepower.
While Stacy's backing the hub off the other side, we can go ahead and disconnect the brake line. Now once you have them disconnected, make sure you cap them off so you don't have brake fluid all over the place. After that, you can undo the emergency brake cable and pull off the backing plate.
Now you can tell by all this old silicone that somebody's been in here before, and that's usually a really bad sign. So let's pull this axle out and see what we got. It looks like we're doing this just in time. That old bearing is shot. Now with the axle out of the way, still need to replace the inner seal. The neat trick for doing that is with a slide hammer. All you have to do is punch a hole in the side of the seal, screw it in, then just hammer it out. To put the new seal in place, give it a good shot of oil to lubricate it up real well, and set it in the axle, and tap it into place using a large socket. Just make sure it goes in square and bottoms out all the way in.
Now we come to one of the most neglected areas on a four-wheel drive vehicle, and that's the gear lube. Now a lot of you guys have probably never even seen this stuff before, but you really ought to change it every 50,000 miles under moderate use, and immediately if you're going to do any kind of deep water crossings at all.
Now we're ready for the new axles. Now the way these things go together is you have your outer seal, then your brake backing plate, or in our case our caliper mounting bracket, then your bearing and your ring. Now the bearing and the ring need to be pressed on at a machine shop, so make sure you factor that into the project. Then just slide the axle in. Now word of caution, make sure your inner seal is well lubricated so you don't rip it.
Now before we can slide the axles into place, we need to run a nice bead of silicone around the flange to prevent any lube leakage. After we have the axle bolted in, we can put on the dust shield, spacers, and caliper bracket. And finally, the emergency brake cable bracket.
Now we can put the rotors on. We'll follow that by bolting on the calipers. Now these things are marked left and right, so make sure you're putting them on the correct side. Now if you're ever in doubt or if you can't find the markings, just remember, these things need to sit so the bleed screw is sitting on the top of this reservoir. If you don't put them on this way, you'll never be able to bleed all the air out of the system.
While Stacy's finishing up the calipers, we can go ahead and button up the rear end. Now, Trailboss already has 410 gears and a limited slip. We're going to cover those up with this brand new differential cover we grabbed from Off-Road Unlimited. Now, not only is this a really slick looking piece of heavy duty aluminum, but it's also going to keep our gears from overheating when we're on the trail.
Now the last thing we're going to do under here is put on the brake hoses. Now you notice our mounting bolt also has a bleed screw on it. Now that's so you can take off the caliper, invert it, and put it on the other side. Now the reason you may want to do this is if your emergency brake cable is too short to connect underneath, you can invert the calipers and hook it up over the top. That's a really nice option. Now once your hoses are in place, you're going to want to put on your hard lines. And you can bend these real easy by hand, whatever shape you want them to be. Matter of fact, you can use your old pieces as a pattern if they're not all bent up like ours are. And once your lines are all in place, just bleed the system and you're done.
Well, now that we have our one-piece axle and these rear disc brake upgrades bolted on, we shouldn't have any trouble facing just about anything off-road now. Don't go away. We got more trucks for you right after this.
Up next on Trucks, we'll go under the hood of the Trailboss to mount the ultimate off-road tool.
Welcome back to the shop. Now we've already upgraded Project Trailboss today by putting one-piece axles and disc brakes in the rear. But if there's one area that all four-wheelers have in common, that's braking stuff. Now whether you end up walking home or not generally depends on how prepared you are.
Now granted, there are some basic tools you should always have with you in preparation for the worst, but every once in a while simple hand tools just aren't enough to get the job done. That's where the Premier Power Welder can really pick up the slack. It's got a central control unit, 6 foot of harness, a throttle control cable, as well as a high output alternator.
The first thing you need to decide is where you're going to mount the power welder. Now for safety purposes, they recommend at least 12 inches from the battery. So we're going to go clear over here to the other side and clear a spot on this inner fender. Now we're also going to need to move this cowl support. And make sure you leave plenty of room for your hood to close. This looks like this is going to be perfect right here. Now all we have to do is pull off the base plate. Then we can mount the base. Then we can reassemble the welder on the base.
Since we're messing with electrical, first thing we had to do was lose the jewelry and disconnect the battery before we could pull the stock alternator. Now we're ready for the new alternator. This thing has 160 amps and you can get them all the way up to 200 if you really think you're going to need it. Also, this is the perfect time to check all your belts and replace them if they're bad.
Now you're probably thinking, man, it's going to take a degree in electrical engineering just to hook this thing up. Well, that's not the case. Matter of fact, everything is extremely well marked. There's your ground to the alternator, there's to your battery. Matter of fact, the only thing that's not just a direct plug-in is you will have to splice into the ignition switch. Now we're going to run our wires into the cowl and over to the other side so we have a real clean installation.
One of the neat things about this kit is if you ever have to bypass your welder for any reason at all, you have this spare regulator and harness so you can disconnect it without leaving yourself stranded on the trail.
Now the welder gets its power based on how fast the alternator spins. So the kit comes with this throttle cable so you can adjust the engine RPM and get the power to the welder that you need. Now putting this thing in is very simple. All you do is decide where you want it. We recommend somewhere close to the welder. Cut the cable to length, then hook it to your throttle linkage.
Also, keep in mind, this upgrade's more than just a welder. sometimes you have to use power tools, and that can be anything from a saw to a drill. Also, since it only takes about 30 minutes to install this kit, you can easily transfer it from one vehicle to another.
Now, it's true the power welder can run your power tools and charge your battery and all kinds of neat stuff like that. But the real benefit of a tool like this is you can weld with it. It only takes 2/3 the amperage of a conventional welder to get the same penetration. It also agitates the puddle 10 times more than a conventional welder, which brings the impurities to the surface, giving you a stronger weld.
Now, we know some of you guys out there are thinking this little welder here is not going to be able to handle the serious jobs off-road, but you can think again. Remember the Rosser Roundup we took you to last year? Well, as you can see, this guy had no trouble fixing a broken tie rod with his power welder. And no, he didn't just limp home after making the repair either. We need to take a break, but don't go away. We'll be right back.
The PT Cruiser from Chrysler already has everybody's attention, but the PT Bruiser from Performance West will blow your mind.
Thanks for staying with us, everybody. You know, every once in a while, a vehicle comes along you just can't help but notice. Of course, the vehicle we're talking about is the latest addition to the Chrysler stable, the PT Cruiser.
And our friends at Performance West have taken what's already a great design and basically fed it a bottle of steroids and renamed it the PT Bruiser. Now, for you guys who aren't familiar with the stock Cruiser, Chrysler has designed a vehicle that borrows heavily on the cool classic styling that made the old Woody wagons so popular in the 60s.
The neat thing about PT Cruiser is that it's like a blank canvas if you're a painter. It offers so many alternatives and options to build so many different ways, and they're all cool. It's like the car you can't do anything wrong with.
Yeah, there's no doubt it's a great platform for a custom vehicle. The front end was tweaked by replacing the front bumper and going with an air dam that flows perfectly with the body line. It also has high-performance driving lights and a custom mesh grille on the bottom that blends together with the main grille as well as the original Chrysler badging.
The Bruiser's been lowered all the way around and sits on 18-inch modular wheels that are wrapped in low-profile sticky rubber. Now, the tail end has a smooth roll pan with really cool chrome exhaust tips sticking out underneath. The lines of the vehicle flow up to a wing that's been mounted on top. Now, as you can see, the whole thing's been covered with color-shifting paint that ranges all the way from gold to purple, depending on how you look at it.
But no matter how you look at it, the interior's just as impressive. It's got 4 lightweight, fully upholstered racing seats, along with 4-point harnesses and a 6-point roll bar. The dash has been covered with carbon fiber and everything's monitored with custom racing gauges.
Of course, those gauges hook up to the very heart and soul of the Bruiser, and that started out as a 2.4-liter stock engine. Of course, everything changed when they bolted on a twin-screw supercharger, a specially calibrated computer, and just in case you need to teach someone a lesson, there's a custom-tailored nitrous system.
So here's the deal. We already like the PT Cruiser bone stock, but we have to admit the Performance West version of the PT Bruiser has definitely grabbed our attention.
We really looked at it as to say, we don't want to be accused of being half-baked or half-hearted, or these guys just don't get it. We want the import tuner guys to go, wow, I'd love to get behind the wheel. I want to get some seat time in this car. This is way cool.
Just can't get enough of trucks? Check us out online at truckstv.com.
Welcome back. Now, as we continue to put the finishing touches on the Wicked Willys, we come to an area that's really important and really easy to forget. That's the fuel system. Now, the original tank on the old wagon was in really good shape, but heck, it was tiny, so we knew we were going to have to upgrade it.
First thing we did was made a trip to Rock Valley Antique Auto Parts where they built us this brand new tank. Now, as you can see, it's made of stainless steel and the mounting points are still in the stock locations along with the filler neck. Basically, all they did to make the tank bigger was make it wider and deeper. What this is going to do is increase our fuel capacity without changing the original location.
Now for the fuel delivery system, we went to Mallory and got one of their Series 140 electric fuel pumps, one of their high-performance filters, and then a fuel pressure regulator. Now to hook all this stuff together, we went down and got some 3/8 fuel line.
Before you slide the tank in place, it's a good idea to hook a wire to the sending unit. That way your hookups will be a whole lot easier to deal with when the tank's bolted in.
Man, those mounting holes are right where they need to be.
They're perfect.
The next thing we need to do is put on the fuel filter. And keep in mind, it's real important to put this thing on before your fuel pump. Now that keeps the crud from getting in the pump and locking it up. And we're going to mount it right here on the frame rail using this supplied bracket. It's also real important to keep this thing level so you can get in here and replace that filter element.
With the tank bolted in place, we have to have a way to get the gas down to it. Now we are going to use the stock metal filler neck at the top. We're going to go with a brand new piece of hose to connect it to the tank. Now whatever you do, don't use an old hose. Spend a few bucks, get yourself a new one.
Now we're ready for the pump. Now once again, we had to drill and tap some holes so we could mount it here on the inner frame rail. Now a few things to keep in mind about the pump. Just like the filter, it needs to sit vertical. It also needs to be mounted at or below the pickup tube level in the tank. That'll keep the fuel from flowing back into the tank when you shut off the engine. Finally, you need to mount it fairly close to the tank if you want to get maximum efficiency out of it.
The fuel line is next. Now the reason we're using 3/8 line is because it's big enough to keep the carb on our big old 360 crate motor happy. Now we're going to run it down the frame rail here just above the brake line, and these little clips are going to hold everything in place.
Now the last piece that we're going to put on is the fuel pressure regulator. Now in a carburetor setup, you only need about 6 to 7 pounds of pressure. Anything more than that, and you'll end up blowing out your needles and seats. Now of course a fuel injection, you need more than that, and a fuel pressure regulator will allow you to set your fuel pressure to whatever your application is. Now, it needs to mount fairly close to the carburetor, so we're going to put ours right here on the firewall, and then just run our fuel lines up to it and then down to the carb.
Well, now that we have our fuel system in the Wicked Willys, it's almost time to fire it up. But right now, we need to pay some bills. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
And now truck gear, parts, tools, and equipment for pickups and sport utilities.
You know, it's unfortunate but true. Everything ages, including your engine, and usually this means increased oil consumption, decreased fuel economy, as well as loss of performance. Well, Valvoline's Max Life is the first motor oil formulated for higher mileage motors. It's a blend of premium oils with additives that condition your seals, reduce friction, and prevent leaks. It also provides better cold starts along with increased fuel economy. Sounds to us like newer vehicles could benefit from Max Life as well.
Now, tuning the rear suspension on a pickup can be a real challenge, especially if you're hauling or towing something heavy one day, the next day the truck's empty. Well, Roadmaster Active Suspension has come up with a way to enhance your rear leaf springs. Now, the kit sandwiches between the spring and the spring plate, runs up through a coil spring, and then wraps up over the front spring eye. Now, what this does is increase the load capacity of your stock spring, like an overload spring, reduces sway like a sway bar, and reduces axle wrap like a traction bar. Now, Roadmaster gives you all these benefits in one upgrade. It's only about 200 bucks.
If you've ever struggled with trying to load large items into the bed of your truck, or you're tired of having to climb over your tailgate to retrieve smaller things that have found their way to the cab, the tuck-in step might be the answer to your problems. When it's folded down, access is no longer an issue, and it can also double as a bench and tabletop. Raise the step to the upright location, and you have a bed extension for longer loads. The tuck and set goes for about $300 and only takes up a couple inches of bed space. That's going to do it for truck gear. Here's a preview of next week's show.
We'll help Project Durango Charger exhale by bolting on a complete exhaust system before going inside the cockpit of our SUV to give the dash a little attitude as well. After that, we'll take a look back at some of the best action of the year in the truck's Y2K review. And finally, it's a custom-built front bumper and winch combination for the Wicked Willys. That's all next week on Trucks.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. We appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, we got more trucks for you next week.
You say we go squeeze that bottle.
No, the bottle's empty.
What?
Trucks is an RTM production.